The sky above Seoul turned black at exactly 3 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. That would change everything forever, Captain Lee. Dae-ho was eating lunch on the deck of his naval ship. When the first shadow fell across the harbor, he looked up expecting to see clouds, but instead saw something that made his rice bowl slip from his hands and crash onto the metal deck giant. Ships hung in the air above the city like floating mountains. Each one was bigger than 10 city blocks put together, and they made no sound at all. The silence was the most frightening part. Lee Dae-ho had been in the Navy for 20 years, and he had never seen anything that moved without making noise. These ships just appeared as if someone had placed them there while everyone was looking away. All across Earth, the same thing was happening. Massive alien vessels appeared over every major city from New York to Tokyo to London to Moscow. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands, and they all looked the same: dark metal hulls covered in strange patterns that hurt to look at directly. No weapons were visible, but everyone knew these ships could destroy entire countries if they wanted. Lee Dae-ho grabbed his radio and tried to contact naval headquarters, but all he heard was static. Every frequency was jammed, every satellite was blocked. The aliens had cut Earth off from itself in a matter of minutes. No government could talk to another, no military could coordinate with their allies. Humanity was alone and blind and completely helpless. Then the voice came. It spoke in every language at the same time, somehow reaching every person on Earth through radios, televisions, phones, and speakers that should not have been able to receive any signal. The voice was calm and cold, like a teacher explaining something simple to slow students. "We are the Vortani Empire," the voice said. "Your species will now serve in our military forces. This is not a request. This is an announcement. We have studied your kind for many cycles. You are good fighters, but your technology is primitive. Your governments will provide us with 88 million males between the ages of 18 and 45 years. These soldiers will fight in our war against the hegemony species." Lee Dae-ho felt his blood turn to ice as the voice continued. "You have 72 hours to begin compliance. Failure to meet our requirements will result in the complete elimination of your planet. Your weapons cannot harm our ships. Your armies cannot reach our fleet. Resistance is pointless. Cooperation will be rewarded with protection and continued existence." The transmission ended, and the silence that followed was worse than any noise Lee Dae-ho had ever heard. He could see people running in the streets of Seoul below. Some were screaming, others were crying. Many just stood still, staring up at the alien ships like statues. Cars had stopped in the middle of roads. Planes had been grounded by some kind of interference. Everything that made human civilization work had simply stopped within hours. The world governments began holding emergency meetings, but what could they say? The aliens had made their position clear. Nuclear weapons were useless against shields that could stop anything humanity could throw at them. Conventional military attacks would be like throwing rocks at armored tanks. The choice was simple: give up 88 million young men or watch 7 billion people die. Lee Dae-ho sailed his ship back to port as fast as the engines could push it. He needed to get to his family. He needed to find his son. Hyun-woo, who was 23 years old and worked as a mechanic in Bison, the boy, would be on the alien list for sure. He was healthy, strong, and exactly the right age. The Vortani wanted soldiers, and Hyun-woo looked like someone who could hold a weapon. The roads were chaos. People trying to escape the cities, people trying to find their families, people who had given up and just sat by the roadside waiting for the end. Lee Dae-ho abandoned his car after 2 hours of traffic that moved like thick mud and ran the rest of the way home. His legs burned and his chest ached, but he kept running because every minute might matter. His house was empty. Hyun-woo was gone. A neighbor told him that government trucks had come through the area just an hour ago. They had lists of names and addresses. The soldiers checking the lists looked sick, like they wanted to throw up, but they followed their orders. Anyway, they took every young man they could find and loaded them onto military transports that drove toward the coast, toward the alien ships. Lee Dae-ho collapsed on his front steps and put his head in his hands. For the first time since he was a child, he cried. He cried for his son. He cried for all the sons who were being taken. He cried for humanity itself. The aliens had turned Earth into a farm, and they were harvesting human beings like crops across the city. Kim So-ra was having the worst day of her military intelligence career. She sat in a bunker deep underground, staring at screens that showed nothing but static. All of their satellites were dead, all of their spy networks were silent. The most advanced intelligence agency in Korean history had been reduced to guessing what was happening in their own country. Her younger brother Taemin had been taken in the first wave of collections. He was 21 years old and studying to be a teacher, but the aliens did not care about his dreams or his plans. They only cared that he was young and healthy and could be trained to kill other species in wars. He had never heard of Sora had tried everything to get him back. She had called every contact she had in government and military circles. She had offered bribes, favors, anything that might help, but the answer was always the same. The aliens had technology that could scan entire populations from space. They knew exactly how many young men lived in each city, each town, each village. There was no hiding from them. The collection process was horrifyingly efficient. Alien transports would land in designated areas. Human military forces would bring groups of conscripted men to the landing sites. The men would be processed through some kind of scanning device that checked their health, age, and genetic markers. Those who passed the scans were loaded onto the transports. Those who failed were left behind but marked for future collection if they became suitably Sora. Watched through security cameras as thousands of Korean men walked up ramps into alien ships. Most went quietly. Some tried to run, but human soldiers stopped them. Few fought back, but they were quickly subdued. The aliens did not seem to care about individual resistance. They had quotas to fill and time schedules to keep. Each transport could hold about 1,000 men, and new ships arrived every few hours. The worst part was watching the families left behind were mothers who would never see their sons again, wives who did not know if their husbands would survive whatever war the aliens were fighting, children who asked when daddy was coming home, sisters like Sora who felt helpless and angry and desperate to do something, anything, to bring their brothers back. By the end of the first day, over 2 million men had been taken from Earth. The aliens worked around the clock, processing humans like a factory assembly line. They had done this before. Sora realized as she watched the smooth, efficient operation. This was not their first time conscripting an entire species. They had perfected the process over centuries of conquest. The governments of the world issued statements calling for calm and cooperation. They said the men would be well treated and properly trained. They promised that Earth would be protected as long as the quotas were met, but Sora could see the fear in their eyes during televised addresses. These leaders had no more control over the situation than anyone else. They were just following alien orders and hoping for the best. As night fell over Seoul, the alien ships began to glow with a soft blue light that made them look even more threatening. Lee Dae-ho stood on his empty porch staring up at the vessels that had stolen his son. Sora sat in her bunker making plans that probably would not work but had to be tried anyway. All over Earth, millions of people went to sleep, knowing that their world had changed forever. The Vortani had made one critical mistake. Though they had studied human military capabilities and individual fighting skills, but they had never encountered what humans called asymmetric warfare. They did not understand that some of Earth's most dangerous people operated outside official structures. They had no data on criminals, rogues, and legends who existed in the shadows. They were about to learn. Park Jin-woo woke up to the sound of his old radio crackling with emergency broadcasts from Seoul. He had been living alone in a small wooden cabin high in the mountains of Gangwon province for almost 5 years now. The government files said he was dead, killed in action during a mission in Syria that went wrong, but Jin-woo had simply decided he was tired of taking orders from politicians who sent other people to die in wars. They did not understand the cabin had no electricity, no phone, no internet connection. Jin-woo liked it that way. He chopped his own wood, caught his own fish, grew his own vegetables, and spoke to no one for weeks at a time. The only technology he kept was an old battery-powered radio that picked up news from the outside world. Most days he did not even turn it on, but today was different. Today the radio would not stop making noise even when he tried to ignore it. Emergency signals were broadcasting on every frequency, and the news was impossible to believe. Aliens had come to Earth. Giant ships were hanging over every major city. The governments of the world were surrendering without a fight. 88 million men were being taken away to fight in some galactic war. Jin-woo sat on his porch listening to reports of families being torn apart and young men being loaded onto alien transports like cattle. His hands slowly formed into fists as he heard a reporter describe how the Korean military was helping the aliens collect their own people. The same military Jinwoo had served for 15 years before he disappeared. He thought about his younger brother Minho, who would be 26 now and probably living in Busan working at the shipyard. Minho had always looked up to his big brother. Always wanted to join the Navy SEALs like Jinwoo, but their parents had talked him out of it. They said one soldier in the family was enough. They said Minho should have a normal life, get married, have children, be safe now. Minho was probably on one of those alien ships heading into space to fight creatures he had never seen in a war he did not understand, and there was nothing Jinwoo could do about it because officially he did not exist anymore. Jinwoo turned off the radio and walked to the back of his cabin where he kept a metal box buried under the floorboards. Inside the box were things he had hoped never to use again. Military identification documents that still worked, bank account numbers for money he had saved from black market jobs, contact information for arms dealers, smugglers, and other people who operated outside the law. He had spent 5 years trying to forget who he used to be, trying to become a simple mountain man who lived in peace, but peace was a luxury that required the rest of the world to leave you alone. The aliens had taken that choice away from him. They had made it personal. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away in a maximum security prison in Siberia, another legend was stirring awake. Choi Yoo-jin had been locked in a concrete cell for 3 years, waiting for the right moment to escape. The other prisoners called her Baba Yaga because she moved like a ghost and killed like a nightmare. Before her arrest, she had been the most feared assassin in the Korean underworld. The Russian authorities had caught her during a job that went wrong. A rival gang had set her up and tipped off the police, but Yoo-jin had taken 7 men with her before they finally brought her down. The trial had been a joke. She spoke no Russian, and the court provided no translator that she trusted. So she said nothing and let them sentence her to life in prison. But Yoo-jin had not been sitting idle for 3 years. She had been learning Russian from other prisoners. She had been studying guard schedules and security systems. She had been making friends with the right people and enemies of the wrong ones. Most importantly, she had been waiting for chaos. The alien invasion was exactly the kind of chaos she needed. Yoo-jin had a small radio hidden in her cell, a gift from a guard she had convinced to help her in exchange for protection from other inmates. The radio was supposed to only receive local Russian stations, but Yoo-jin had modified it to pick up international broadcasts. She listened to reports of the alien invasion and smiled for the first time in 3 years. The Russians were pulling guards from prisons to help process their conscription quotas. Half the security staff had been reassigned to collection centers. The remaining guards were nervous, scared, confused. They were not watching the prisoners as carefully as they should have been. Yoo-jin began her escape at 2 a.m. during a shift change. She had spent months memorizing the exact timing of guard rotations. She knew which cameras had blind spots. She knew which doors were left unlocked for a few seconds during shift changes. She knew which guards would panic and which ones would fight moving through. The prison was like dancing a deadly ballet. Yoo-jin had practiced these movements in her mind thousands of times. She slipped past sleeping guards, disabled security cameras, picked locks that should have been impossible to open. 3 guards saw her, and 3 guards died before they could raise an alarm. The hardest part was getting past the outer perimeter fence, but Yoo-jin had prepared for this too. She had been trading cigarettes and favors for small pieces of wire and metal for 2 years, slowly building tools that looked like harmless junk to casual inspection. But assembled correctly, they could cut through chain link and disable electric barriers. By sunrise, Yoo-jin was 20 miles from the prison, moving through the Siberian forest. Like a wolf, she had no money, no identification, no clear plan, but she had skills that very few people possessed, and she had a burning desire to make someone pay for thinking they could cage her. The news broadcasts she heard on stolen radios as she traveled south were getting worse. Every day more men were being taken from Earth. Every day the alien ships grew bolder and more demanding. The governments were not just cooperating, they were competing to see who could deliver their quotas. Fastest Yoo-jin decided she was going home to Korea. She had contacts there, people who owed her favors from her days as an international assassin. The journey would take weeks, maybe months, but she had nowhere else to go, and if the aliens thought they could take over her planet without a fight, they were about to learn how wrong they were. Back in his mountain cabin, Jin Woo was making similar plans. He had spent the morning contacting old friends through encrypted channels. The black market arms trade was still operating despite the alien occupation. In fact, business was better than ever as desperate people tried to buy weapons that might work against Vortani technology. Most conventional weapons were useless against alien shields. But Jin Woo was not thinking about conventional attacks. He was thinking about asymmetric warfare, the kind of fighting that had made him famous in the Middle East before he disappeared, the kind of tactics that worked when you were outnumbered, outgunned, and had nothing to lose. The aliens expected resistance to come from governments and organized armies. They were prepared for tank battles, airstrikes, missile attacks. But they were not prepared for individuals who specialized in making the impossible look routine. They were not prepared for people who had spent their entire careers learning how to kill efficiently and disappear. Complete. Jin Woo packed his gear into a military surplus backpack: weapons, ammunition, medical supplies, communications equipment, everything he would need for a one-man war against an alien empire. He had no orders, no backup, no support from any government. But he had never needed permission to do what was right. As he locked up the cabin and started walking down the mountain path, Jin Woo thought about all the young men who had been taken from Earth. They were probably scared, confused, desperate for someone to tell them they had not been forgotten. Well, Jin Woo was going to tell them exactly that, even if he had to fight through an entire alien fleet to deliver the message. The war was about to begin, and it would not be the kind of war anyone expected. It would be fought by people who refused to follow orders, who operated outside official channels, who believed that some things were worth dying for even when the odds were impossible. Aliens had made their biggest mistake. When they assumed humans would behave like every other species they had conquered, they were about to discover that humans were different. Humans were unpredictable. Humans were stubborn. And when humans decided to fight back, they did not stop until they won or died trying. Jin Woo smiled as he walked toward the lights of the city below. It felt good to be a soldier again. Yujin's journey from the Siberian prison to Korea took exactly 18 days of careful travel through criminal networks and smuggling routes she had memorized years ago. The Russian underworld was chaos because of the alien invasion, but chaos was something Yujin understood better than most people. She knew how to move through confusion, how to find the right people, and how to convince them to help her. Her first stop was a warehouse in Vladivostok where she had done business before the arrest. The owner was a man named Volkov who smuggled everything from weapons to people across the Pacific Ocean. He owed Yujin 3 favors from jobs she had done for him in the past, and now she was calling in those debts. Volkov was nervous when Yujin appeared at his door. She looked like a ghost, thin and pale from 3 years in prison, but her eyes still burned with the same cold fire that had made her famous. The Russian knew better than to ask how she had escaped. He simply listened. As she explained what she needed, transportation to Korea was the first requirement. Volkov had a cargo ship leaving for Bizin in 2 days. The captain would not ask questions about extra passengers as long as they stayed hidden and caused no trouble. Weapons were the second requirement. Yujin needed equipment that would work against alien technology. Most conventional firearms were useless, but there were rumors of new ammunition that could penetrate Vortani shields. The third requirement was information. Yujin wanted to know everything about the alien occupation forces, their movement patterns, their security procedures, their weaknesses. Volkov's smuggling network reached across Asia, and his people were still moving goods despite the invasion. They saw things that governments missed. What Volkov told her was disturbing but also encouraging. The aliens were efficient but predictable. They followed the same procedures on every world they conquered. They relied on technology instead of tactics. They had never faced opponents who specialized in asymmetric warfare. Their biggest weakness was arrogance. They believed their superiority made them invulnerable. Jin spent the voyage to Korea planning her next moves. She needed allies, people with skills that complemented her own. The job ahead was too big for one person, even someone with her abilities. She needed someone who understood military operations, someone who could think strategically while she handled the tactical details. Jin Woo had been tracking Vortani movement patterns for 6 days when he intercepted the encrypted transmission. It came on an old Korean military frequency that should have been abandoned years ago. Someone was using codes that only Special Forces personnel would know. The message was brief coordinates for a meeting and the time. The location was an abandoned warehouse in Incheon near the port where alien transports landed every few hours. Jin-woo arrived early as always, checking the building for traps, surveillance equipment, and escape routes. The warehouse had been empty for months, but someone had been using it recently. There were signs of temporary occupation: food wrappers, sleeping materials, basic tools. He was examining a set of lockpicking tools when Yoo-jin emerged from the shadows behind him. Most people would have been startled, but Jin-woo had spent too many years in combat zones to be surprised by anything. He turned slowly, keeping his hands visible, and studied the woman who had appeared like a ghost. Yoo-jin was smaller than he had expected, but she moved with the controlled precision of a professional killer. Her clothes were dark and practical. Her gear was minimal but high quality. She watched Jin-woo with the same careful attention he was giving her. Both of them were predators recognizing another predator. Their conversation was direct and efficient. Neither wasted time on introductions or explanations. They both knew why they were there. They both understood what needed to be done. The only question was whether they could work together without killing each other. Yoo-jin had identified weaknesses in Vortani security protocols during her journey from Russia. The aliens were overconfident, relying on orbital defenses and energy shields designed to stop large-scale military attacks. They had minimal ground security around their processing centers, assuming that primitive humans could not threaten their advanced technology. Jin-woo had reached similar conclusions from his observations. The Vortani thought like conventional military commanders, not like guerrilla fighters. They expected resistance to come from organized armies with predictable tactics. They were not prepared for individuals who specialized in impossible missions together. They began planning an operation that would send a message to both the aliens and the millions of human prisoners aboard Vortani ships. Their target was the main processing center outside Seoul, where thousands of conscripted men were being held. Before transport to the alien fleet, the facility was heavily defended, but not against the kind of attack they were planning. The center was built like a fortress, but fortresses were designed to keep armies out, not individuals who could think like water, finding every crack and weakness. Jin-woo's SEAL training had taught him to approach problems from unexpected angles. Yoo-jin's assassin background gave her skills in stealth, infiltration, and elimination. They spent 3 days studying the facility, learning guard rotations, shift changes, supply deliveries, and communication protocols. The aliens followed precise schedules because efficiency was more important to them than security. They had never encountered opponents who could use that predictability against them. The plan they developed was insane by military standards, but perfect for their skills. They would infiltrate the center during a shift change when human guards were distracted and alien supervisors were focused on transport schedules. Their primary target was the communication array, which could broadcast to every Vortani ship in the system. If they could send a message to the conscripted humans aboard those ships, they might inspire resistance throughout the alien fleet. Humans were natural rebels. Jin-woo knew they just needed someone to show them that fighting back was possible. Yoo-jin agreed, but she wanted to do more than inspire. She wanted to hurt the aliens badly enough that they would remember Earth as the planet that fought back. The equipment they needed came from Jin-woo's black market contacts: explosives that could damage alien technology, communications gear that could interface with Vortani systems, weapons that fired rounds designed to penetrate energy shields. None of it was guaranteed to work, but it was better than anything the official military had treated. Yoo-jin contributed her own resources, including detailed intelligence about the facility's layout that she had gathered through methods Jin-woo did not ask about. She also provided escape routes that used the city's old sewer system and abandoned subway tunnels. Her criminal background had taught her to always have multiple ways out of any situation. As they finalized their preparations, both operatives understood that this mission would probably be their last. Even if they succeeded in sending their message, the aliens would respond with overwhelming force. Every human on Earth would become a target for retaliation, but sometimes the most important battles were fought by people who accepted that they might not survive to see the results. The night before the mission, Jinwoo and Yujin sat in the warehouse, sharing a meal of military rations and talking about why they were doing this. Neither of them had been ordered to fight. Neither of them had official support. Neither of them expected to be thanked for what they were about to attempt. Jinwoo thought about his brother Min-ho, who was probably aboard an alien ship somewhere learning to use weapons against creatures he had never seen. Yujin thought about all the families that had been torn apart by the Vortani conscription. She thought about the 3 years she had spent in prison planning her revenge against anyone who thought they could control her. They were not heroes, they were not patriots, they were not even particularly good people, but they were free human beings who refused to accept that their species should serve as cannon fodder in someone else's war, and sometimes that was enough tomorrow. They would walk into the most heavily defended alien facility on Earth with nothing but their skills, their weapons, and their absolute refusal to surrender. The odds against them were impossible, but impossible odds had never stopped either of them. Before the Vortani were about to learn what happened when you threatened people who had spent their entire lives making the impossible look routine. The Vortani processing center looked like a metal mountain that had fallen from space and crashed into the Korean countryside. The facility covered 20 square kilometers and rose almost 100 meters into the night sky. Strange lights pulsed along its surface in patterns that hurt human eyes to follow directly. Guard towers dotted the perimeter, but they were designed for large-scale attacks, not individual infiltration attempts. Yujin and Jinwoo lay on a hill overlooking the complex, studying their target through military binoculars. The aliens had built their fortress according to principles that made perfect sense for conventional warfare. High walls, automated defenses, clear fields of fire around the perimeter. Any army trying to assault this place would be destroyed before they got within a kilometer of the walls, but armies were predictable. Armies moved in formation. Used vehicles followed standard tactics. The two humans watching from the darkness had spent their careers learning how to do things that armies could not do. They specialized in being where their enemies least expected them, doing what logic said was impossible. The facility's daily routine had become familiar after 3 days of observation transport. Ships arrived every 4 hours carrying alien supervisors and equipment. Human military trucks brought groups of conscripted men to the main gate every few hours. The processing took exactly 90 minutes per group, then the men were moved to holding areas to await transport to orbital ships. Guard shifts changed at midnight and noon. The changeover took exactly 12 minutes, during which the normal patrol patterns were disrupted. Human guards focused on briefing their replacements while alien supervisors reviewed status reports. It was the only time when the facility's security was not. Prefect Jinwoo checked his watch. 11:47 p.m. In exactly 13 minutes, the midnight shift change would begin. Their window of opportunity would last for 12 minutes. After that, every second would bring them closer to discovery and death. But 12 minutes was enough if everything went according to plan. Yujin was already moving before Jinwoo finished checking his gear. She flowed down the hillside like liquid shadow, avoiding the motion sensors and infrared cameras that watched the approaches to the facility. Her assassin training had taught her to become invisible to both human senses and electronic detection systems. The perimeter fence was 3 meters high and charged with enough electricity to kill a normal person, but Yujin was not normal. She used insulated tools to create a gap in the fence large enough for both of them to slip through. The breach would be discovered eventually, but hopefully not for several. Horse Jinwoo followed her through the gap, moving with the same silent precision that had made him famous in Special Forces operations. They were inside the most secure facility on Earth, with no backup, no support, and no way to call for help if things went wrong, but they had known this would be a one-way mission from the beginning. Moving across the facility grounds required every skill both operatives possessed. The aliens had night vision cameras that could detect body heat, motion sensors that responded to the slightest vibration, automated defense systems that would activate if they sensed unauthorized movement, but technology was only as good as the people operating it. And the Vortani had grown careless. After months of easy conquest, They reached the main processing building just as the shift change began. Human guards were gathering near the entrance to receive their briefings while alien supervisors retreated to their command centers to review the night's transport schedules. The normal patrol routes were temporarily abandoned as everyone focused on the changeover procedures. The building's side entrance was protected by an electronic lock that should have been impossible to bypass, but Yujin had spent 3 years in prison learning things that normal people would never need to know. She had memorized the sound patterns that different lock mechanisms made when they were being manipulated. She could feel the vibrations that indicated when tumblers were properly aligned. It took her 4 minutes to open the lock. 2 minutes longer than she had hoped, but still within acceptable parameters. Jinwoo kept watch while she worked using hand signals to indicate when guards were approaching their position. They communicated without words, like dancers performing a routine they had practiced 1,000 times inside the building. They encountered technology that was beyond human understanding, but human suffering that they recognized immediately. Thousands of Korean men were housed in cramped holding areas waiting to be shipped off to fight in an alien war. Many were injured from resisting capture, others were sick from the stress and poor conditions. The sight filled both infiltrators with cold rage that made their mission personal. These were not soldiers who had volunteered for combat. These were fathers, sons, brothers who had been kidnapped from their families and forced into slavery. The Vortani would pay for this, but first, Jinwoo and Yujin had to complete their primary objective. The communication center was located on the 3rd floor of the main building. Reaching it required passing through corridors filled with both human guards and alien supervisors. The humans were easy to avoid. They followed predictable patrol routes and made noise when they moved. The aliens were more difficult. They moved silently and seemed to have better senses than humans. Yujin handled the alien encounters with techniques she had perfected during her years as an assassin. Each kill had to be silent, and the bodies had to be hidden where they would not be discovered immediately. She moved through the facility like death itself, leaving no trace of her passage except for the growing number of missing guards. Jinwoo focused on electronic countermeasures, disabling security cameras, jamming communication frequencies, and creating false signals that would confuse the facility's monitoring systems. His Navy SEAL training had included extensive work with enemy technology, and the Vortani systems were advanced, but not incomprehensible. They reached the communication center at exactly 12:36 a.m. 24 minutes after beginning their infiltration. The room was filled with equipment that looked like alien sculpture, but functioned like the most advanced radio array ever built. Banks of crystalline devices pulsed with energy that felt warm against human skin even from several meters away. The primary console was operated by a single Vortani technician who died before he realized the humans were in the room. Yujin's blade entered his nervous system at exactly the right point to prevent any sound or movement. The alien collapsed silently while Jinwoo began examining the communication equipment interfacing with the alien. Technology required both technical skill and intuitive understanding. The Vortani used different principles than human engineers, but the basic concepts were universal. Jinwoo had to assume that communication was communication regardless of what species had built the equipment. Yujin established a defensive perimeter, knowing that their time was running out. The facility's security systems would eventually notice the missing guards and disabled cameras. Once that happened, they would have minutes at most before the entire complex was flooded with armed response teams. Jinwoo found what he thought was the main transmission control and began modifying it to broadcast on frequencies that would reach the Vortani ships in orbit. The equipment responded to his touch in ways that felt almost organic, as if the devices were alive and aware of his intentions. The message he prepared was simple but powerful, speaking in Korean, English, and Mandarin. He identified himself by his military service record and spoke directly to the conscripted men aboard the alien ships. He told them that Earth had not forgotten them, that resistance was possible, that the Vortani were not invincible. The most important part of the message was tactical information about Vortani weaknesses that Jinwoo and Yujin had discovered during their infiltration. The aliens relied too heavily on technology. They followed predictable patterns. Their command structure was rigid and vulnerable to disruption. The Transmission lasted exactly 3 minutes before alien security protocols detected the unauthorized broadcast and shut down the communication array, but 3 minutes was enough to reach every Vortani ship in the solar system and deliver a message that would change everything as alarms began sounding throughout the facility. Jinwoo and Yu Jin prepared for the most dangerous part of their mission, getting out alive. The aliens now knew they were under attack and every exit would be watched, every corridor would be guarded. Every possible escape route would be blocked, but they had prepared for this possibility. They had studied the facility's layout, memorized alternate routes, and identified weaknesses in the building structure that could be exploited. Yujin had explosive charges that could create new exits. If necessary, Jinwoo had smoke grenades that would confuse pursuit, fighting their way out of the communication center required every combat skill both operatives possessed. Vortani guards responded faster than human soldiers, and their weapons fired energy beams that could cut through steel. But they moved in formation and followed standard tactics which made them predictable to opponents who specialized in chaos. The escape route led through maintenance corridors that the aliens had not properly secured. They had assumed no human could navigate the complex internal structure of their facility, but Jinwoo had memorized the blueprints and Yujin had an assassin's instinct for finding hidden passages behind them. The facility erupted into full. The message reached Transport Ship 7 while Korean conscript Hanwoo Bin was trying to sleep in a metal bunk that was too small for human bodies. He had been aboard the Vortani vessel for 6 weeks, learning to use alien weapons and fighting techniques that made no sense to human minds. The training was brutal, and the instructors showed no mercy to soldiers who failed to meet their standards. Woo Bin had been a construction worker in Seoul before the aliens took him. He knew nothing about war or combat, but the Vortani did not care about his background. They only cared that he could hold a weapon and follow orders. Their training program was designed to turn civilians into soldiers in the shortest possible time using methods that would have been illegal on Earth. When Jinwoo's voice came through the ship's communication system speaking in Korean, Woo Bin thought he was dreaming. The voice was calm and confident, like someone who had never doubted that rescue would come. It spoke of Earth and freedom and the possibility that the Vortani could be defeated around him. Other conscripts began sitting up in their bunks listening to words they had not heard since leaving home. The voice told them they were not alone, that people on Earth were fighting back, that the aliens had weaknesses that could be exploited. It gave them tactical information about Vortani security procedures and suggested ways that prisoners might sabotage their captors. The transmission lasted only 3 minutes, but those 3 minutes changed everything. Woo Bin looked around the dormitory and saw something in the other men's eyes that had not been there before: hope mixed with anger, determination replacing despair. They had been told they were slaves fighting in someone else's war, but the voice from Earth reminded them they were still human beings with the right to choose their own fate. On Transport Ship 12, Chinese conscript Liu Wei was working in the engine room when the message began. He had been a mechanical engineer before his capture, and the Vortani had assigned him to maintain their propulsion systems. He understood the alien technology better than most humans, and he had been thinking about ways to damage it without getting caught. The voice speaking Mandarin told him exactly what he needed to know. Vortani engines were powerful, but they relied on precise calibration of crystalline matrices that generated the energy fields. Li Wei realized that small changes to those calibrations might cause system failures that would look like accidents rather than sabotage. Within hours of the transmission ending, strange things began happening aboard Vortani ships throughout the solar system. Engine failures forced 3 transports to return to Earth for repairs. Weapon systems malfunctioned during training exercises. Life support systems developed mysterious problems that required constant attention. The aliens initially assumed these were random mechanical failures. They had conscripted hundreds of species over the centuries, and equipment problems were normal when primitive beings tried to operate advanced technology, but the failures were too frequent and too convenient to be accidental on Earth. The broadcast had been heard by more than just the prisoners. Yujin and Jinwoo had not realized their transmission would also reach resistance groups that had been forming in secret across the planet. Military veterans who refused to accept surrender Criminals who saw the occupation as an opportunity for revenge ordinary citizens who had lost family members to the conscription. Captain Lee Dae-ho heard the message while hiding in the mountains with a group of former naval officers who had deserted. Rather than help the aliens they had been planning small-scale attacks on Vortani supply lines, but Jinwoo's broadcast gave them hope that larger resistance was possible. Kim Sora received the transmission in her underground bunker where she had been coordinating intelligence gathering for what remained of the Korean military. The message contained information about Vortani, weaknesses that her analysts had not been able to discover through conventional means. It also gave her something she had not had since the invasion began, a reason to believe her brother might survive. The alien response was swift and brutal. Within 12 hours of the broadcast, Vortani ships began attacking cities around the world. They targeted government buildings, military bases, and communication centers, but they also struck civilian areas where resistance activity was suspected. The message was clear: humanity would pay for any defiance, but the attacks only made more people angry instead of crushing resistance. The Vortani retaliation inspired it. Families who had accepted the occupation began helping rebels. Military units that had been cooperating with the aliens started providing weapons and intelligence to resistance groups. Yujin and Jinwoo spent the next week moving through Seoul's underground tunnels, avoiding the massive manhunt that had been launched to find them. The aliens had flooded the city with search teams offering rewards for information about the two humans who had attacked their facility, but the Korean people had decided whose side they were on. The urban underground had become a maze of safe houses, supply caches, and communication networks run by people who had never been soldiers but who had learned to fight because they had no other choice. Shopkeepers provided food and shelter. Students carried messages between resistance cells. Former criminals used their skills to obtain weapons and equipment. Jinwoo found himself coordinating attacks by groups he had never met, using tactics he had never taught. The resistance was growing beyond anything he had planned, becoming a movement that no single person could control. People were making their own decisions about when and how to fight, but they all shared the same goal: driving the aliens off their planet. Yujin discovered that her reputation as Baba Yaga had spread throughout the Korean underworld. Stories of her escape from Siberian prison and her attack on the Vortani facility had grown in the telling, until she had become a symbol of human defiance. Criminals who had never cared about politics were volunteering to help her because she represented their freedom to live outside the law. The most important development came from an unexpected source. Intercepted Vortani communications revealed that the aliens were facing problems across their entire empire. The rebellion on Earth had inspired similar uprisings on other conquered worlds. Species that had been serving the Vortani for decades were suddenly questioning their loyalty. On transport ship 7 Han, Woo Bin had organized a group of Korean conscripts who were planning to seize control of their vessel during the next training exercise. They had identified weaknesses in the ship's security systems and recruited sympathizers among the human guards. The plan was dangerous and would probably result in their deaths, but they had decided that dying as free men was better than living as slaves. Similar conspiracies were forming aboard dozens of other ships. Chinese conscripts were sabotaging navigation systems. European prisoners were poisoning food supplies destined for alien officers. American soldiers were providing weapons to their fellow captives. The Vortani had expected their human soldiers to be grateful for training and equipment. Instead, they were using both against their captors. The aliens tried to maintain control through increased surveillance and harsher punishments, but every act of repression created more rebels. The Vortani had conquered hundreds of worlds using the same methods, but they had never encountered a species like humanity. Humans seemed to become more dangerous when they were cornered, more creative when they were desperate, more united when they were threatened. Jinwoo and Yujin realized their small operation had triggered something much larger than they had intended. The spark they had lit was spreading across the galaxy, turning the Vortani's own conscripted army against them. But they also knew the aliens would not accept defeat easily. The real war was just beginning. Reports from resistance cells around the world indicated that the Vortani were preparing for a final assault on human civilization. They were bringing additional ships from across their empire planning to destroy Earth completely rather than risk losing control of their human slaves. But humanity was no longer the same species. The aliens had first encountered months of occupation had taught humans how to fight an enemy with superior technology, how to coordinate without central command, how to survive when everything seemed hopeless. The next phase of the conflict would determine whether Earth remained free or became another dead world in the Vortani Empire. But Jin Wu and Yu Jin had given their species something invaluable. They had proven that the aliens could be hurt, that resistance was possible, that humans would never stop fighting as long as even one of them remained alive. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you tried to enslave a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history fighting everything that threatened its survival, including itself. The war that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen before. The Vortani Empire had conquered hundreds of worlds using the same proven methods: superior technology, overwhelming force, and the assumption that primitive species would eventually submit to inevitable defeat. But humanity refused to follow the script. Jin Wu and Yu Jin found themselves leading a resistance movement they had never intended to create, operating from hidden bases in Seoul's abandoned subway tunnels. They coordinated attacks across the planet using encrypted communications and networks of volunteers who had appeared from nowhere. Ordinary people had transformed themselves into guerrilla fighters using skills they had learned from movies, video games, and pure desperate creativity. The aliens controlled the skies and could destroy any target they chose, but they could not be everywhere at once. Human rebels struck at supply convoys, communication relays, processing centers, and anything else that kept the occupation functioning. They used homemade explosives, stolen weapons, and tactics that no military academy would have approved, but which worked against an enemy who expected conventional resistance. Captain Lee Dae-ho had assembled a fleet of fishing boats, cargo ships, and pleasure craft that attacked Vortani transports in the seas around Korea. The aliens had orbital supremacy, but they had not expected humans to weaponize civilian vessels using improvised missiles and ramming attacks that traded human lives for alien casualties. Kim Sora's intelligence network had grown to include resistance cells on every continent, sharing information about Vortani movements and coordinating attacks that struck simultaneously across multiple time zones. The aliens found themselves fighting a species that communicated faster than their command structure could respond. But the most important battles were happening in space aboard the Vortani ships, where millions of human conscripts had heard Jin Wu's message and decided to act. Han Wubin's group had successfully seized transport ship 7 after a bloody battle that left half the aliens dead and most of the humans wounded. They were now using the vessel to attack other Vortani ships carrying human prisoners. Similar uprisings were spreading throughout the alien fleet. Chinese engineer Li Wei had convinced his fellow conscripts to sabotage the engines of transport ship 12, sending it spinning out of control toward Earth's atmosphere. American soldiers aboard Ship 19 had murdered their alien instructors and were teaching other humans how to use Vortani weapons against their former captors. The rebellion was growing faster than either side could control. It had spread beyond Earth to other worlds where conscripted species decided they no longer wanted to serve the Vortani Empire. Entire star systems were declaring independence. Alien governors were being assassinated, and the Empire's century-old expansion had ground to a halt. The turning point came when intercepted communications revealed something that